So today we're going to talk about muscle function first, of the tissue itself, physiology work, and then we're going to do axial muscles, which is the stuff here in the trunk. So when we look at muscle, the main function muscle brings to the table is it shortens, it contracts. That's the main thing a muscle does. So when it shortens, when a muscle is attached to two bones, like in the arm for example, and it's attached up here and down here, and it shortens, it's going to move that arm. It's going to move that elbow. That's movement. When we hold muscle, we can have that shortening be sustained, and it holds us upright. Otherwise, we'll go down and collapse. So that's posture. That's also very, very important. Then muscle also supports soft tissue, like the gut behind the stomach wall. We got like six packs here galore, or 8-pack. So behind that is the gut. That's supported, protected. That's one good example of that. It regulates movement in and out of the body and through the body, like the gut tube, the muscle of the gut tube that we can see, oops, that falls out, but we can see here, it has muscle in it. It's partly has a muscle around this tube. It helps the stuff move through the gut. We have the mouth muscles that help us get things in, and we got the butt muscles that help get things out. So movement in and out the body, and also through the body. Another very interesting thing is it generates heat. When it's cold outside and we're shivering, heat is a byproduct of muscle contraction. So that's another good function we have. So that's pretty good. Let's look at its characteristics. We've already said it's contractile. It has the ability to actively shorten. And that shortening is triggered by a nerve impulse. So every muscle, I'm saying for this particularly pertains to the main muscle type we're studying today, which is skeletal muscle. We'll briefly talk about the other types too. We have 3 types of muscle in the body, but and they all have to have some irritation, some ability to be triggered, to then cause a contraction once they're triggered. But without them being triggered, they do not do this contraction. And then the contractility, as an overview look at it, is basically caused by protein threads on the inside that slide past one another. So you basically have protein threads. You can see it, maybe you can see it on here. There are long little lines, and inside the protein threads, they're arranged the whole length of the whole muscle, which in an arm, it can be the whole length. That's the whole muscle length. And when these different types, these 2 different types of protein thread hold on to each other and come closer towards one another, the muscle as a whole comes closer. It's kind of like a tug of war a little bit. And the muscle shortens as a whole. And that's what's happening in there. So we have these specialized organelles, these internal organs in a muscle cell, and they slide past another, and they're like thread looking, and when they contract, when they slide past one another, the muscle will contract. So that's the main active function that we have. In order for that to happen, we already said a nerve needs to be impulsing it, so it needs to be itself excitable, or a word is irritable, or responsive. Because if a nerve has to stimulate it and nothing happens, it's not excitable, nothing's going to happen. So the muscle tissue itself needs to be able to be irritatable or responsive. And then what actually ends up happening, we have this cell membrane around the muscle is irritable in its own right, And then that cell membrane goes deep through every little deep muscle, and that's the blue lines here that we can see. And so we're going to look at that in a little more detail in a minute. So that's sort of part of what happens in a muscle contraction as a physiological response. Then we need to have the muscle tissue needs to be able to be extensible and also needs to be elastic. So once it's shortened, it needs to be able to be lengthening again. That's extensibility. It has a normal length, relaxing length, but it can go a little further too. So it's elastic. It can recoil and it go back to its resting length. And those are usually flexibility things are functions that decrease with age a little bit as the tissue dehydrates. And we can see that in muscle also. But the cool thing I always go back to, the main function is contracting as an active function. Terminology is always cool because we got these Greek and Latin things in there, and if we know the prefixes and suffixes, we can say, oh, this sounds like that, so this might be part of that. So if you see something that says myo as a prefix, or mesio, M-I-S, you know it's muscle. You just know it's muscle. Also, the word sarco is a little different, but it also means flesh. Well, that means flesh. That also refers to muscle. Because when we look from the outside in the body, we got the skin, and underneath we got some fat, and underneath that we got muscle. So in the body, they talk about the soma. Have you ever heard of the term psychosomatic illness? Well, the word soma is in psychosomatic illness, and that means body. Soma means body. But in like in neurology, for example, we call it the somatic nervous system, the visceral nervous system. Somatic there refers to muscle and bone, essentially, because that's the body when we look from the outside in. The visceral nervous system refers to all the inside stuff. And in the nervous system, that becomes a very important distinction because a lot of the brain power is used to manipulate muscle tissue, to be able to stand. Have you ever seen a robot stand up? It's really hard. And then you push a little bit, it falls down. It's not easy to do this bipedal thing. So one reason why our brains developed the weird way they've developed is because we stood up at some point. Because it's really hard to not fall down. I talked about the three types of muscle briefly. We got skeletal muscle, type 1. That's the one we're really going to talk about mostly. That mostly moves bones. I say most or mainly because we got some of the facial ones that also move the skins around. When we look at those cells, they're long, cylindrical, they're multinucleated. When I look at a muscle cell in a muscle, the longest muscle I got is from up here down to here. All this length right here. That's one muscle fiber is this length. So when I look from an embryological perspective, we have multiple little cells that get made and then they fuse together. The nucleus stays, and that's why it becomes a cell that has more than one nucleus, which means multinucleated. I know, big deal, but that's why. The important here, this muscle is under voluntary contraction. So I have to, I can influence it by thinking about it. I can say, you're going to walk over there and turn off the light, and these muscles, they better work. I'm thinking about them, and then they work. So that's conscious activation of a muscle. And when we look at the muscle from a microscopic perspective, which is right over here, you can see, it's still hard to see, but you basically have lines, all parallel. And that is those internal threads that pull on one another to make the muscle shorten and contract. That's what that parallel structure looks like. So those are all these little internal protein thread arrangements. Cool, got that. And we'll go back to that in a minute. That's the main topic after this slide. And then the second one is cardiac muscle. We'll talk a little bit about cardiac muscle when we get to the heart. But those are cells that doesn't look as arranged. This looks extremely arranged. This looks a little bit more all over the place. And you can see how they're like cells here, and then here, and then here. Different branched cells. There's one nucleus per cell. And this muscle tissue is involuntary, thank God. Because cardiac muscle is the muscle that is in our heart. So that's this muscle right here. And this muscle, so there's not just one muscle cell, there's a lot of muscle cells that make this muscle. That's why it's a branched muscle looking thing. But this cell, this heart, contracts as a unit, as a one unit. And so it has a lot of these little gaps in the muscle itself, they call them gap junctions, that sends a signal through all the muscles at the muscle cells, all those little cells at the same time to contract. And then the heart muscle contracts and the blood gets pumped through the body. We contract, the heart contracts intrinsically, and that's what, 60 to 100 times per minute is the norm. And it does that unconsciously. We don't have to think about it. And that's why I say thank God. You don't have to, every time the heart contracts, you don't have to think, oh, contract, oh, contract. Oh, shit, I forgot, I'm dead. That wouldn't work. And then the last style that we're looking at here is smooth muscle, and that's the walls of hollow organs and tubes. And those muscle fibers look really cute. They look like spindle. See that? Like that? There's a spindle there. Spindle-looking cells, one nucleus, very involuntary. They are very different than the other two types. They have like long sustained contractions that they can do slowly. You feel that when your stomach is talking to you and you're too hungry. That's what you're feeling. These things are contracting and they go like, where is it? And, you know, we all know that. And a lot of people in the world, unfortunately, know that all too well. That how we're feeling. So let's go a little bit deeper into muscle. Let's talk about muscle structure. So when we talk about the muscle fiber, again, its uniqueness is that it contracts. And we talked about how it needs to be stimulated and needs to be excitable. And the cell membrane is able, in the muscle, is able to transmit an electrical impulse when it is stimulated by a nerve. Cell membrane in a muscle is called a sarcolemma. That's why in muscle. That's why, sarco is muscle related. Whenever you see sarco, you know it's muscle. And it has its own name. It's not just a cell membrane because it's got this electrical transmission thing going on. The stimulation ability, this excitability, it can be irritating. And when that is irritated, then it brings that irritation, that excitability, that nerve impulse deep into the muscle. If this is a muscle fiber right here, these little structures, these little long things are sort of subunits of muscle fiber. And then there we got all these threads inside of them, And so the cell membrane is irritated. Here's the nerve coming in to do this thing with the cell, and it irritates it, the membrane right here. And then it penetrates deep, and these blue lines are cell membrane that travels deep into the whole structure. And it's like the whole thing gets electrocuted in one moment. And then guess what? It contracts, like you putting your head into something. It contracts. Or you're hitting the funny bone. At least it shoots that. And so that sarcolemma that projects deep into the interior of the cell is called the T-tubules. They give it a name. I couldn't be more descriptive. T-tube, why, whatever. But that's what they do. And they carry that nerve impulse deep into it. The second structure that I pointed out, that is the muscle within the muscle. So if you look at a structure, a muscle structure, you got the muscle fiber here, and then deeper, you got all these little smaller muscle-looking things, and those are these structures here, and those are called myofibrils. So they're not myofibers. The myofiber is a whole muscle. They're myofibrils. And those are the contracting organelles in the muscle. And basically, it's just all parallel arrangements. So whenever things contract, they all help each other and the whole muscle contracts. Does that make sense? A little bit? So far, what we got to worry about is we got a cell membrane called the sarcolemma, and that thing goes deep into the muscle fiber and sends that impulse all the way through it. So the whole muscle gets electrocuted at one moment, or irritated. So then we take it a step further, and we also understand that, well, let's do the anatomy a little bit. So this is a muscle fiber, a cell, and the cell is from here to here for the whole muscle span, whatever the muscle is. And then we cross-section that, and we get a myofibril, a section of that, and then that's portrayed right here. So this here is a myofibril right here. Just a subunit of a muscle fiber. And so between, so let's see, so that's what we have so far. We go in there and we irritate that, and here it's actually yellow. Sorry, on the model it's blue, on here it's yellow. But it's the one that comes down and circles it right there. Because what we also have, in between that, we have this blue baggy stuff around there, hanging around there. And that blue baggy stuff is between the T-tubules, and that's known as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Holy cow. That's the name. And a sarcoplasmic reticulum is actually an endoplasmic reticulum for the muscle. Remember the endoplasmic reticulum? It makes protein, the ER, right? It makes protein and fatty stuff. Well, here is totally different. Here it's just a bag that holds a lot of calcium ions. So this here, because the ER is a structure that's baggy, that has cell membrane around it, so they just make baggy things out of it and put calcium in it, tons of calcium. And so when the calcium is released, when the nerve gets down and stimulates, and we have a nerve impulse coming down here, it tells this sarcoplasmic reticulum, or we call it SR2, to release all the calcium to the inside of the myofibril. And the whole inside of the myofibril gets flushed with calcium. And that initiates the muscle to contract. Alright, recap. So far we have nerve impulse stimulates the muscle, which is the sarcolemma, that penetrates deep into the muscle fiber via these T-tubules, which stimulate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or SR, to release the calcium to the inside of the muscle fiber. Got it so far? Step by step.
Professor?
Yes?
Could you do like a little flow chart?
Yeah, we're getting there.
Okay.
That's at the end. We have the whole flow chart.
Okay, cool.
This is one of the hard concepts in muscle stuff to understand. So don't sweat it if it's a little difficult. But we're trying to make it as easy as we can. So let's see, what do we got here? We're going to talk about the threats a little bit. So we described the myofibril. That's the contractile organelle, basically. And we have talked about these threads. And so now let's talk about the threads a little more. We have two types. We have a thick filament called myosin, and we have a thin filament called actin. And they call those myofilaments. Those are just threads. That's threads. You don't need to know that word. Don't worry if that all scares you at the word. So when you open the muscle up, you see these little lines right in here. Boom, 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 boom. They're parallel. And what we do is we divide them into small little units that we can study how muscle works. And we have those units, and that's one unit right here, and that unit is known as a sarcomere. Again, a name you don't need to worry about to remember, but it's just for understanding we have to talk about. So whenever we study a muscle in a sarcomere, which is a small little section from a myofibril, which is one little part of a whole muscle cell. Those, let's keep this clear here. When we look at those muscle threads a little bit in detail, we see a few features that are kind of cool. We see the myosin, here the red one is myosin, or the thick filament, the thick thread, and then the small one is the actin, the thinner thread. And so when a muscle contracts, those two need to slide past one another. One goes that way, one goes that way. And then a muscle contracts, because they're arranged the whole muscle length. The myosin has this interesting arrangement where it's got these, it's actually arranged of a lot of legs, and then it has this thing called here as a head, sticks up. And the head goes up and down, like that, up and down. Boom, 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 boom. And that head has a place on its top that it can attach to a part of the thin filament of the actin right here. It's called an active side. And that is just a magnet. So whenever that active side is open, that head wants to go glue to it. Boom. And then as soon as it attaches to it, it kind of pulls towards it. So it does this. Pulls towards it. And when it does that, it lets go of an ADP, an energy molecule. Remember ADP? ATP, ADP? Energy molecule. And as soon as that happens, a new ATP, the other energy molecule, comes in and attaches itself to this head again, which makes the head go back into the upward position in order to be able then to attach back to the actin, to the thin filament. And so you got this thing going on where the myosin head attaches to the thing on the actin, the active side, and the actin pulls on it, the ADP gets released, the new ATP comes in, it cocks it up, it goes back up, and it does this all the time. It goes in this circle, round and around. Lots and lots of those things doing it to lots and lots of different fibers that are arranged in all these different, all these different things. This is a fiber. This is 100 fibers in here. Then it's a muscle. All those little tiny pullings will make a muscle short. And they call that the sliding filament theory. And that right there is your whole muscle contraction. Where does this calcium thing come in? The calcium is here, and this is a little complicated looking, but basically what you have here is this blue one, is that thin filament, the actin. And the actin is actually more than just one thing. There's more to it, because it has a thread that sits over the active side on the actin. And that's right here, that blue-green thing here that I'm doing here. And then it's got, when I cross-section that, then it's got this weird yellow thing. Oh, I should take that. Then it's got this weird yellow thing here, and that's right here. And that is sensitive to calcium. They call that the tropomyosin. Don't worry about the word. And when calcium attaches, here, calcium ions. When calcium attaches to that yellow thing, it moves down, and when it moves down, it rolls that thread away from the active side and exposes the active side where then the myosin can attach to it. That's why this attachment is like magnetism. It's not, doesn't take any energy or anything. If it's exposed, it attaches. If it's not exposed, it doesn't attach. The calcium exposes active site on the actin. That's why when somebody dies, you have a stiffy. You know, you can't move those limbs. When somebody, you have rigor mortis. Have you heard of rigor mortis? When you die, all the calcium leaches out, the myosin attached to the actin, and at some point, you're going to run out of ATP. And when you run out of ATP, then things are just stuck, attached. And that's why the muscle does not have any elasticity left when we die. And then it deteriorates anyway. But that takes a while. So that's that part here. Did you write this down? Good. Because I'm sure now that's where the whole flow chart is. There's my flow chart. I didn't draw it though. I stole it from someone. Share information. So what happens is, number one, we're going to have a nerve impulse coming down, and the nerve impulse is called an action potential. Nerve impulse. And that then travels down, that nerve impulse travels down through those two T-tubules, penetrating the whole muscle, all the fibrils, everything. And then as a second step, the calcium is released into the muscle itself. And then the calcium binds to the actin and expose that active site. And at that moment, the contraction begins because the myosin heads can glue onto it. It's a magnet. They call them myosin cross bridges, alternatively attached to the actin and detached. They have complicated language, huh? Yeah, I know. But you just read that very slow, and then it comes in slowly. And the words you don't understand, you go back and look them up. You only need to remember the words that I want you for the test. Don't get caught up. Be caught up on understanding the concept. And then come ask me if you're not sure about it. Because we can always plug in the words later, and in Bio 2, whatever, 20AB, you're plugging in plenty of words, that's for sure. But if you know the concept, by then, the words going easy. Okay? So, we're here. Action potential, nerve impulse come down, calcium release, change the active site on the actin, the myosin can attach to it and make a muscle contraction. As long as we have ATP, we assume we're not dead. We have ATP. And then as soon as the calcium is removed, removal of calcium, these don't attach anymore, and we have blocking of the active side of the actin, and the muscle contraction stops. You just learned the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction. You can be proud of yourself. It's a very difficult one to understand. This and the nerve impulse are some of the harder ones to get. So we'll...
One more time.
Want to do one more time? Good. Let's do one more time. Nerve says, I want to contract the muscle. Action potential is a nerve impulse. It fires down the T-tubules. On here, the T-tubules are these here that go through the inside of the muscle. These blue ones here. These are blue. Yeah. Then that triggers the calcium release into the space. Calcium's role is to go to the actin and expose the active site that then acts like a magnet for the head of the myosin to attach to it. And then the head of the myosin does the action with the ATP, and it's basically a cocking down, back up, down, back up. So it brings it down, it brings the actin a little closer, so they shorten, they do a little tug of war. One slides one, the other slides the other way, the muscle contracts. Then it lets go of it, the ADP falls off, ATP comes in, it goes back up to the happy position where it can attach to, it does it again. It does that cycle. And as soon as the calcium goes away, the active site will be covered again, and the head of the myosin have to detach. They cannot glue onto it because there's no magnet exposed.
So the calcium is the key in
The-
order to activate the magnet.
Right, you have these two keys. You have the calcium is the key to have that active site exposed so the magnet thing happen. And the ATP is the key that we actually move the head and the contraction actually happens. Yeah, that often is a confusing portion. Because calcium is really not doing anything active. It's sort of a, but it's the key role. So if anybody asks you why you need calcium, you got a good answer. You better have good calcium because the heart works the same way. We still need calcium. Good. Whew. That was a lot. You got that a little bit? You understand it for a first over it? You go home? Today's Monday, right? We'll do it again on Wednesday if you want. Tell me to go to this slide and we'll review this slide for that portion. And make sure you come with some questions. Now we need to talk a little bit more about nerve innervations. The skeletal muscles are stimulated by nerve impulses. We talked about that. The place where the nerve attaches to the muscle, they connect, is known as the motor end plate. I don't know. Yeah, that's good too. That's what that word means. The neuromuscular junction is the area where the nerve and the muscle would connect. So the motor end plate is the area, the whole thing. And where the connection really happens is the neuromuscular junction. I think if you think about the wording, this is passive word knowledge, right? Neuromuscular junction, you can understand. It's the junction between the crossing between the nerve and the muscle. Now we get to the important part of this slide. One nerve can stimulate a varied amount of muscle cells. Stimulate means innervate. A varied amount of muscle cells. So you see the word innervation, you think nerve to muscle connection. Who fires that muscle up? That's one of the questions. In the face, it's mostly cranial 7. That's one of the questions, though, that I don't make you study too heavy on because it's too much information. But what's important here is one nerve can stimulate a varied amount of muscle cells. So each time then, when that nerve fires, all of the fibers that it innervates contract. So a motor unit, which is that one, a motor unit is a nerve with all the muscles that it attaches, that it innervates. So when you see the word motor unit, you think of the one nerve going to all the different muscle fibers. And each muscle has many motor units. But now the interesting thing is, if you have a motor unit that consists of a few muscle fibers, we can create a weak contraction but incredible fine motor control. Your muscles in the face. You can make all kind of weird stuff. But if you have a muscle, a nerve that innervates many muscle cells, you make a very strong contraction, but that's pretty crude. You don't know if my quad's smiling or not. It just does, it's not so sensitive. That's a good example of that. The quad has one nerve go through many, many fibers. So when that contracts, it's pretty heavy contraction. You cannot make a little small facial expression with that. So that's kind of cool. So the more motor units, the more muscle fibers, the more crude, the stronger the motion. And then the motor units recruited at the same time also increases the strength of the contraction. But that's also why you can have a sustained contraction of muscles without fatigue, because you can rotate the motor units. We don't feel that. That just happens. But not every muscle needs to be able to contract all the time, and you're still not falling down, the quads give out. because they can rotate. And so some muscles can relax for a hot second and recoup. So there is our motor units. Cool. And then we got the muscle metabolism, and the picture of that is on the other side. But when you look at muscle metabolism, you need to, then look at ATP mostly. That's made in a mitochondria. We talked about that previously. Muscle needs a large amount of that, and so forth. It's got a lot of mitochondria for once. The easiest fuel to convert into ATP is glucose. So muscle also has stored glucose, which is glycogen, a little bit, so we can chip some off. Oxygen helps make rapid and numerous ATPs, but the problem is intense muscle strain causes a lack of oxygen, and without sufficient oxygen, the muscle has no ability to make ATP. It can only make it with the oxygen. It can only make it what we call anaerobically. And an means without, and air means without air. So that means no oxygen. Aero means oxygen for us in the body. There's many more things in the air, but for us it means the oxygen. So that's a problem, because that will build up lactate, which then needs to be converted in the liver back to glucose, and lactate tires muscle easily.
That's the burning you feel when you exercise, right?
That could be the burning, yeah. But we also have another trick, and we have the stored creatine phosphate, and that can be used to rapidly phosphorylate, which means put a phosphate back onto the ADP that's used up, and making a great new source of ATP. So that's pretty cool too. So when we look at muscle contraction, muscle metabolism, we have the ability to use air like we walk. We don't strain it too heavy. Then we have a regular aerobic respiration where we need oxygen. So when it says aerobic, you need you need oxygen. That's a great source of ATP. 36 ATP per glucose molecule. That's the best we can get. But when we do not have oxygen available, we have to not do that step right here in the mitochondria, and we have another step available without oxygen, known as glycolysis. So that's without oxygen, or anaerobic, and that gives us 2 ATP per glucose. That's a big difference, 36, 2. We want oxygen if we can have oxygen. So that will give us really tired. That's the lactic acid, and that goes to the blood. And so with that help, with that we have one more help available, and that's that creatine phosphate that basically takes that phosphate it has itself, creatine phosphate, CP, and puts the phosphate over to the ADP, makes an ATP, and its creatine is left. And then that has to go get recycled in the liver. I know, so much stuff. Just different food sources. Basically, the universe will not leave you alone if you can't walk because you don't have any oxygen. It can still have other ways to make more energy to be able to walk home. So that's really all that I want really full forced out of that. And then you can look it up. Muscle twitch. We have different types of muscle fibers. We have slow, we have fast, we also have intermediate fibers, but we're looking at the extremes a little bit more. So when we look at muscle twitch, that's a single muscle, one muscle contraction. One contraction, not sustained, just a one contraction. That's a muscle twitch. Some muscles are slower to contract than others, and they're also not as forceful sometimes, but they can hold the contraction much longer. As we've seen previously, if we have oxygen present, we can make the best amount of energy. So those muscles rely on oxygen a lot and have a lot of amounts of a molecule a protein that's not hemoglobin, like we have in the blood. And hemoglobin in the blood carries oxygen around the blood. Oh yeah, we didn't do these yet. I'm preparing for those slides, so I'm already ahead of you there. So I thought I'd lecture that. Hemoglobin, remember we talked about that in the cell chapter when we made protein, the hemoglobin? And the hemoglobin carries oxygen around in the body. And again, oxygen is the thing we use to make the ATP, the energy in the mitochondria. It's that last step to get the phosphate attached. And in the muscle, we have a molecule called myoglobin. Remember, myo is one of those terms for muscle? Mesio, myo, sarcom. Myoglobin also carries oxygen, but what's cool about it, it has an affinity to oxygen, an attraction to oxygen that's much greater than hemoglobin has. Much greater affinity than hemoglobin. And that's really cool, because now what we can do is we can have blood vessels travel by the muscle, and the hemoglobin sucks the oxygen right out of the hemoglobin. The myoglobin sucks the oxygen right out of the hemoglobins, and the muscle has a lot of oxygen available to use for muscle contractions to make up, be able to stand up and not fall down. So that's that sustained muscle contraction. Because of this muscle contraction, because of this myoglobin, the muscle looks very red. Myoglobin is very red, and they contract slow, but long. So they're used in posture, and they're also known as tonic muscles. Then we have the other extreme of the muscle types that we want to talk about briefly, and those are the fast ones. And those are very forceful, they're very fast, but they tire easily. Those are your sprinter muscles. You think running fast. They do not have as much myoglobin because they don't rely on oxygen all the time. We wear the muscle out and then it has to recover. And so they're looking a little more pale or whitish. And so they're pale looking. And those are the fast twitch muscle fibers. So there's your variety pack a little bit. And the next thing we have to talk about is how we contract. A few different types of contraction, actually. We can think about that. We can contract like bringing up the water to my mouth. So the object moves. That's one contraction. Then I can, carry Einstein's heavy head around and not drop it down and hold it up by contracting, by not moving the object, just holding it, like a crate or whatever, a grocery bag. That's another type of contraction. So, the type of contraction that moves, that does not move the object, but holds it, is known as isometric contraction. Have you heard of that before? Isometric, isotonic? Gym people? No, gym, right? You were right? Gym people? So holding a thing posturally, or just holding it, is an isometric contraction, because when we look at the word, iso means same, metric means meter, which means length, which means the length of the muscle stays the same. The object still moves. When an object is moved, they consider the tone of the muscle stays the same throughout, although I'm not so sure about that. But they call that isotonic contraction. Isotonic contraction. Isometric, isotonic. The interesting there, we can also then differentiate even further. The isotonic contraction, we can go to concentric, which means muscle shortens, and eccentric contraction, which means the muscle lengthens. So when I lift up an object, concentric contraction, shortens the muscle. Eccentric contraction lowers it. I'm still contracting, I'm letting slowly go. And when you do gym, they say you confirm that or not. The eccentric is the best, right? Feel the muscle? Yeah. The letting go the weight slowly. So they'll do this. Oh, I'm so cool. You gotta let go slow. I tell people, especially when they come to the office and they're in rehab or so, I say, lower the weight, lower the speed, and don't go to the full end range. Then you protect your joint. And that usually works pretty well. Or maybe those are the people that never come back.
I have a question.
I hope not.
So is that why when you have a trainer, they tell you not to pull the weights really fast?
No. I had this guy in the office, and now I swear, he thought he was really smart. And my doctor confirmed, because he went to the primary after that, and she says, I just referred him to the ortho. I didn't, And he did CrossFit things. So he took a dump, one of these belt things, weight things that you can hold, and he does like that. He goes like, boom, straight up with the weight. And he had back pain. He said, the PT said I shouldn't do it at home. It's so easy. I just did it at home anyway. He started computer science. So that, you nerdy people. And I swear he pulled the muscle off the bone. I mean, it felt like, ouch, and the muscle felt like just gave. It gave. It was like, I don't know, you gotta see. So I think he went to the orthopod. Probably get an injection or something. He wouldn't listen to me. I'm a nobody. He does some big animal tell him that he shouldn't do this, The doctor said, I didn't even evaluate him. I just gave him a script to the orthopod. No, because you can tell by the history if somebody's not listening or doesn't want anything other than an injection. All right, so that's contractions. And then when we look at muscle and we're describing muscle, because that's what we're going to do now after this, we look at these two words. We look at the origin and its insertion, and I talked about this briefly. Most skeletal muscles attach to 2 or sometimes more bones that usually cross one joint, sometimes more than one joint. The origin is the bony attachment that remains stable during a contraction. So in an elbow contraction, this is the origin, like in a bicep. The insertion, and in the extremity is most of the proximal attachment, so it's mostly the one closer to the end. We're not moving the most, we're not doing this. We're doing this. So that origins are usually up here. And then in the insertion is the movable part of the attachment. In this, the extremity is usually distal. Now, another interesting thing is, oh, really? I got one more to go. A muscle only contracts. So when the front muscle here, the biceps, contracts, it's going to stay like that. Now, I can move the arm to randomly pull it down, or I can have another muscle on the opposite and say, when I want this to straighten out, I need the other one to contract. And then this can lengthen passively. So the one that contracts is called a prime mover or agonist. I should write this here a little bit better right home. Agonist. That goes to down here, okay? So that's like in this motion, that's the biceps. The opposite one that does the opposite motion, there's always a muscle that does the opposite motion, and that's the antagonist. I can't write at all. Antagonist. This is really important stuff because this is as simple as, because then we have a neurological concept here. Let me go to that. So neurologically, when this contracts, this has to relax. Because if they both contract, you won't move nothing. It's a neurological concept. So what flabbergasted me is when you go to, when I learn massage and I go do massage and all that, it's usually squeezing muscle. You say, oh, this is tight, we got to squeeze this muscle, it's really tight, we got to work it out and relax it. But the law goes, when one muscle contracts, the other one has to relax. That also means when one does not contract and is inhibited, is not working right, the other one will contract and be tight. So you can massage it all out, make it all nice and limp, but now you have two muscles that are limp. Who's going to protect the joint? And you can talk around to any doctor, they probably hardly understand that, because that's that new in science, in basic science. And that's that, I mean, I do a stimulation technique that you stimulate the muscle that don't fire, but nobody else does that. You can't even talk to people, they don't get that yet. But that's very, very important to understand those things. So if you have, for example, you have back pain, and you go to a massage therapist and it doesn't work, and you go to a chiropractor and it doesn't work, and you stretch it out in yoga, elbow or whatever we do, and it doesn't all work. But especially the massager just massages a tight back. Maybe there's something else going on. So if you don't get results, you keep looking further, and that's one place where I often look and find incredible places. I mean, it's crazy, but that's what that's about. The last one down here, when you do a motion, the synergist here, when you do a motion, let's say this motion, I can't just have one muscle that does the motion. Because the weight might go a little down, and then that's not stable, that goes down, that will hurt the joint. So I'm going to have multiple muscles that help this main muscle work. And the helpers are known as synergists in the muscle. So you've got antagonists, agonists, antagonists, synergists. When we look at the muscle as a whole structure, you got the fleshy part on the inside, and then you got a tendon on the ends that anchors the muscle into the bone. So that's a tendon. The belly of the muscle is in the center. And when we need to look at different muscle fiber types, different muscle types, not the cardiac and smooth and all that, no, different skeletal muscle face, the way they look. Because we got an interesting thing going on. We can have different shapes, different arrangements give us different strength transducences. So like, for example, we got parallel fibers that just like the biceps, they're just like going up and down parallel. And then inserting a tendon. They are not that strong, they have little strength because there's another type, and that is where the fiber goes sideways into a long tendon in the back. You know, like the feathers you see on a bird. When you take a feather down, you look, you got the stem and you got these things coming out. That's the way that looks. I mean, this is, the birdie will be on both sides, right? And so they call this type of fiber type the pennate muscle fiber type because it's penna means feather. And that is a really strong type because now you contract all these little things in an angle. You got collectively much stronger contraction than if it's just one there and one there and one there. You got those puppies down here, they're all like that. So that's really the shape-wise the most important thing that I think of, because then we can have a unipennate, that's a one, or a bipennate. That's uni is this, bipennate is when it comes from both sides. You don't need to remember that. It's just I want to have you understand the differences a little bit, but it's not going to be on test in terms of terms. And some places, you know, where you got a lot of muscle happening, like in your butt or up here, you have a lot of friction. Or here, there's a lot of friction here. And so wherever there's a lot of friction, we have some helping structures that we need to put in. And we have muscle fascia that allows some muscle to glide past another. But where we have a lot of friction, we got to put a synovial things in there. We're going to put a synovial tendon sheath, for example, around the muscles right here that go to the wrist. We talked about carpal tunnel. That when we type, they always move, they always work. That creates a lot of heat. They actually have, oh, it's not here. They have like little wrappings around them made of synovial bags, like fluids inside, trapped in bags to cool down the motion, really, to help the gliding and make it not so hot. So the tendon sheath, or then a big one that we often talk about is the bursa. Who ever heard of bursitis? I have a lot of people. Bursitis is big, like in the glutes. Like people are standing a lot, or elder people, like 75 plus. I got one right now. Cortisone doesn't do anything. We're trying to laser. We're figuring out how to take the inflammation down. So that's like bursa is like more like pillows, like baggy things. They're not around tendons or anything. They're just sitting there like pockets, like in here. And then the other thing we already talked about is the sesamoid bone. We talked about the kneecap, how it helps round the muscle function. Do you remember that? We talked about that in the tissue chapter. Like a sesamoid bone is in a tendon and helps and aids the motion to be smooth. And so when you look at the quad, you have the quads that go forward and then they round because the tendon has a bone in it, that's the patella. If the patella weren't there, you take it out, the muscle goes from here and then it just drops down to right here where it attaches. You would have to put a lot of force into this muscle before it jumps up, versus having a round one where the force can slowly go up and be distributed evenly. So that's a sesamoid bone. We got some here, big one. We got some in the toes. We got a whole bunch of them. And that's it. So I think, what time is it? Oh, crap. Well, you stick with me for a second longer and we'll do the muscle lower, the skeletal muscle, the axial skeletal muscle, the trunk muscles, that's not too bad. We'll do that. Give me till 7:30 and then somebody says stop and we'll stop there and then we'll pick it up on Wednesday where we left off. Okay?
Okay.
And then we'll do lab. Oh, I have to talk. No, we'll do that afterwards. So when we look at the trunk muscles, we start with we group the muscles now we group the muscles in areas and in motions and sort of what works together a little bit. So we'll start with the superficial muscles that move the head and the neck around. The first one that's always a big deal is the trapezius. And a trapezius is this big muscle. You probably know a trapezius or two. It's this big muscle that's attached right here, the whole length of the spine, and then it goes out to the shoulder tip and back up. And so it's like this big old trapeze looking thing back in here. Lots of pieces, huh? So it's attached to the back of the skull at the external occipital protuberance, and it goes down the back of the neck, which there's a ligament there that sticks behind from the spinous processes superficially towards the skin. They call that the ligamentum nuchae. And then it goes all the way down and attaches to the spinous processes, SP means spinous processes, of the entire thoracic spine. So on this one, essentially, from up here all the way down to all the way down here. And it comes out and it goes onto the spine of the scapula, the acromion process, and the lateral third of the clavicle. So right there, it holds on to it. So you can see this massive muscle right there holding on to this thing. So when it contracts, it helps extend the head backwards. You can see that when it pulls back. Right here, it pulls back with both. That goes backwards. You can. It also tilts the head to the same side. So when one side contracts, it tilts the head to that side. And it rotates it to the opposite side. Like when it contracts, it tilts it this side, but it rotates it over. Like that. I know, huh? Lots of motions. The superficial muscles on top, they do a lot of motions. The deeper muscles do less motions and more anchoring or holding or one joint motion, not the whole thing motion. And the scapular motion, we'll talk about that on Wednesday, I hope. So the second muscle is the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Whoa, what a name. Sternocleidomastoid. This muscle is named after the attachments. Often muscles are named after where they attach. So a difficult muscle becomes your friend. As long as you know where the sternum is, where the cleidum means clavicle is, and where the mastoid is. Sternum, clavicle, mastoid. Ah! It goes from the sternum and the clavicle onto the mastoid process. It's right here. I show it on this model. It's right here. Right here. There's a clavicular and the sternal head. Cool muscle. One thing you can do when you want to study muscles is a little hard to solve them, but here with this one you can actually oppose the action. Let's see what the action is. Extend the head, tilt to the same side, and rotate to the opposite side. Okay? This one I can take here, and I can show it and say, like, what does it do? Oh, it does this. Or I can oppose the motion, and it bulges out, and I can feel it. With these, we can do all that with these. So that's a good way of studying them. So that's the sternocleidomastoid, or we call it the SCM. So we don't always have to write out that name. And then when you get deeper into the neck, we get to the front. And it's a little vulnerable when you touch there. You can press hard, but you might get a little nerve firing going on down in here. But the muscles that you touch in there, the flesh right here on the side, that's the scalene muscles. And they're attaching on the side of the neck, transverse, TP means transverse process. Transverse process. Blah, blah, blah. So up here it attaches on the transverse process, and it goes into the ribs. It goes to the first two ribs, rib 1 and 2. Right there. So it actually goes from here and it goes down and behind the clavicle into the ribs.
Where is it in relation to the one you just spoke about?
The SCM?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's behind. You got the sternocleidomastoid here. So you got it here on the outside, and then you go below it there on the rib. You basically take the rib, and right on top of the rib is where you have it. Because the SCM goes all the way to the front midline. So down and below here you feel these are all scalenes, these on the side. And what they do, they're really, really important because they are, what's important about them, oh wait, we're one back now. What's important about them is the brachial plexus go through them right here, and the brachial plexus are all the nerves that go from the neck to the arm. And so, right in here, you can squeeze those suckers because they are often tight. You touch these, if they're tight, you got problems. And because they attach into the rib, and very often the arm's attached to the shoulder blade, and the shoulder blade anchors to the rib cage, and so whatever we do here has an effect on the rib cage. So when I yank something really heavy back here, it's going to yank up here and pull on this. And if this pulls too much, then these joints get distressed, and the muscles that attach to those bones that cover those joints will tighten up and get pissed off because they're trying to protect it. You know, so they don't fall apart. Well, guess what you're also going to get? You're going to get these nerves get pressed on. And then that gets you potentially your carpal tunnel syndrome. So that's where the scalenes are very important. So I got techniques they do, like they really go deep and move the arm around and stuff. I often feel like working somebody under the rib cage is very helpful with that.
Oh no.
Oh, stretching. So there you go. It elevates the ribs, first couple ribs, and it flexes the neck. Neck if used on both sides, and it bends it if used on one side. Again, for us, we want to recognize them. On the model, we can see them right in here. That's another place we see them. Sternocleidomastoid, scalenes, trapezius. The three like that, right there. I know, I'm so excited about this stuff. I'm sorry, I'm like a little nerdy about it. Now these, you're just sitting back, you don't worry about deep, they're not here and they're not on the test. However, they are important when you have whiplash. The longus colli and longus capitis. Oh, that's not even on yet. But now we're deep, we're taking all these away and we're going straight onto the spine. We're going straight onto the front of the spine. Right here. These deep muscles are known as the longus colli. And we're not going to worry about where they're attaching. We're just going to cruise through them. What I want to know is clinically. Because what happens is if you have a whiplash, you know what a whiplash is?
Yes.
You know, you're yanking your head?
Yes.
So when you're driving and you're sitting in a car, you want your head on the headrest. Not in front of the headrest. So you don't want to drive like that. You want to drive like that. Because when you get smacked from behind and your head's on the headrest, that head's going nowhere. All this is nice and protected, at least somewhat, but much more protected than if your head is not on a headrest and you get smacked and that head falls back. It bends this spine backwards. It rips these muscles. You got whiplash. So that's why I want you to know, not, they call, I need to know what they call. You don't even know what they call. I'm not going to tell you. But I want you to know there are deep muscles like that get hurt. And they don't get hurt when somebody slaps you and your head's on the head. They get hurt when somebody slaps, I mean when it's heavy enough, of course. But they get hurt because the head is in free fall and it has to go back. So my first mother-in-law, when she was 89, 88, 85, something like that, she's driving down in Southern California like this. I'm like, Fern, please, somebody can hit you. If somebody hit you, you know, you want it like that. She says, Christoph, why would anybody want to hit me? I'm like, oh yeah, never mind. Why did I say that? Because you never got hit. Now these are really good muscles. These are important. Let's see, do we going to start with those? Yeah. The suboccipital triangle. Look at that here, suboccipital triangle. So when you take all the muscles away, now this top muscle here, here's the trapezius attachment. So we talked about this. We got more. We got one that's called the semispinalis. We got one that's called the splenius. Don't worry, just layers. Layers of muscles. So trapezius, below that we got a couple of layers. And then we take those away, and then we get to the deep ones. And the deep, deep, deep ones here are known as the suboccipital triangle muscles. There's one right here. There's one like here. And there's one on the side and one on this side. So there's 4 muscles. You see them nicely here. There's 2 going up and down, one this way and then one this way. They move the neck around like a little bit like this. But they also have a nerve going through it, and if they're really tight, that nerve hurts. Give you a headache. But they are really, really cool because when the rectus capitis major and minor, they're called. Rectus means erect, straight. Capitis means head, so they keep the head up. If they don't work, the head goes down. If you test them, you have to test them this way. And then we have 2, they call them obliquus, capitis. They are oblique means sideways. And they are these here, a superior and inferior. Again, name's not that important. What is important about this is the fact that you have fascia in your body. And fascia are thick. Do you eat meat? Anybody eat meat? If you cut the meat, you got the thick thing in the meat, you got to cut out. You can't chew on it. It's really chewy. It's not bone though. That's fascia. We have a lot of that too. So one of the major places we have that fascia is in the back. We have one that goes from the sole of the foot all the way to the back. The ham is in the back here, up the spine, up here to the front of the head. These muscles are like playing the marionette on this whole back line. So depending on what happens here, the whole back line responds. So that is when you throw, no, you don't throw a cat in the air. If a cat jumps or something, but if a cat is in air on the back, it orients its eyes, then the eyes orient this, and then the whole body orients itself after that, and the cat lands on its feet. I've not seen one landing on the back. I know. So these muscles also are attached to our eyes. So when we do a lot of eye work, these get tired too. Like I can lay in bed, like head like this, almost asleep, I watch a little TV. My neck's tight when I watch TV. Even if I'm fully relaxed. And then I need an iPad so I don't, want to watch more TV. Yes, question?
Yeah. So all those three muscles help orient the eye?
No, they're influenced by the eye. They're help orient this whole back stuff. So if these are like really tight, you most likely have this be really tight too. But the eyes are related to it. So if these are really tight, it could also mean that there's a lot of screen time. Like too much looking in at work or something. And you just kind of like, it gets headachy because of that. So the eyes are related to these deep upper occipital muscles. And the Chinese talk, this is what? Portal of something. So when you get the cold, you get the flu, first place, suboccipital pain. Because the other thing is, what do they control? They work the movement of C1 and C2. The spine, the brain goes through there. So if we got messed up here, we got messed up the whole brain talking to the rest of the body. That's not that great. So up here becomes crucial for multiple reasons. But I want you to be aware of it. You don't need to know the names, but I think it's kind of a cool fact with the cat and all that.
So when you talk about suboccipital triangle, do you automatically assume that is that three muscles?
Actually 4.
4.
The inferior 2. So we got the 1 here, 2 here, 3 here, 4 here. They just don't list the third one here in the middle of this. They only color 3 of this. If you turn it, it's 1 more. So it's the rectus capitis major, which is the outside. The longer one goes from the occipital ridge to C2, and the minor goes to C1, and then the obliquus capitis superior and inferior. But you don't need the names. I just want you to understand the layers. And these are the other 2 layers that I just spoke about. So we have the trapezius, and underlying there we have the semispinalis and the splenius, and then below that we have that suboccipital triangle. So I put these in for your completion, because when you go to the next class, it took me a long time. I mean, it took me almost to make these slides. It's embarrassing to make these slides to really understand these muscles. And so maybe that's why I made the slides. But these are kind of nice pictures, how you can see how the fibers arrange. Because when you go then to another class and you have to look at the cadaver, you have to be able potentially to identify them. You can see the fibers arranged differently. One goes more from the middle to the outside. The other goes more from parallel. The semispinalis and splenius are these muscles. Or if you go to the doctor and you ask, he does something, say, which muscle are you working on? And then you can talk to him about it. Yeah, this class enhances your medical treatment, because when they know what you're talking about, they give you, more attention. I don't think that's true, but they did study that the patient base that asks more questions to the medical community creates better medicine, because it keeps everybody thinking. And so that is important. So with that, I'm going to leave it at that.